From think pieces to academic studies, there is no end to the conversation about violence in art and its effect on the audience.
No, you choose to watch what you watch, so it depends.
I prefer to look at story as a reflection of humanity rather than as something that has an effect on humanity. Both are true, but I think that the former is more productive than the latter. It's asking the question, what does this say about us now, rather than attempting to control the media for different outcomes. So when approaching this topic, I thought, what about the effect of violence on the story itself? What about violence through a more mythical lens? What does its use in the story say about us? In real life, violence is rare. Anyone can commit violence. Everyone has the potential. It is everywhere, and yet in day-to-day life, for most people, it is rare. But mythically, violence is a part of the cycle of life and death. It represents a shared struggle. A hero is an inherently violent figure. They have violence done to them. They must commit violence to save others. There is an apparent balance or binary that exists in the story between violence and innocence. Which sides different marginalized groups land on reflects something important about that social status quo. In Aesthetic Violence in Women in Film, Kill Bill with Flying Daggers, Joseph H. Kupfer states that film aesthetically frames violence in 3 ways. When all 3 are found, the violence provides more layers and depth to the entire piece. Structural violence is the most noticeable. It's stylized violence. It's how violence is framed, how the characters move across the scene, and how it contributes to the cinematic experience. It's what makes the violence in this scene different from the violence in this scene. Violence as a symbol is particularly interesting because if it's soaked in too much symbolism without structural or narrative reason behind it, it doesn't land well. Or when the violence is specifically towards women, it will carry a symbol or metaphor for women and not for men. If the creator is ignorant of this, then again, it doesn't land well. Implied violence can be poetic. It doesn't have to be on the screen, and oftentimes it shouldn't be. This is mostly seen in films targeted towards kids, but it's also commonly used in films which contain so much violence that it acts as an exhalation during an otherwise intense moment. Implied violence is also used to avoid showing sexual violence towards women.
We're not through yet.
Which can be overwhelmingly distasteful to the women in the audience. Narratively essential violence is that sort of mythical point I was making earlier. Heroes are inherently violent. Physical struggles and violent struggles are more visually accessible, and they're more exciting. In this case, the violence provides straightforward narrative meaning. A character begins weak but is now strong enough to beat up the bad guys. A character was searching for meaning but is now willing to die for a cause. I originally wanted to make this video to explore why this image was therapeutic compared to this image, which makes me feel sick. Both of these scenes are implied violence against women, even though the nature of their deaths were not explicitly violent. I could talk to no end about how visually and meaningfully this falls apart, but I wanted to explore why the imbalance hurts women specifically. But let's back up a bit, because the problem with violence done to women is directly connected to the problem with women being violent. In Violent Women, the Femininity, Narrative, and Violence in Contemporary American Cinema, Hilary Neroni states that the violent woman has always been present in American cinema, but that her use is still not on par with that of the violent man. She shows up in isolated incidents, such as femme fatales in film noir, or in large quantities with a genre, such as the final girl in slasher films. Neroni states that the depiction of a violent woman upsets this association of violence with masculinity, yet at each moment when the violent woman emerges on a wide scale in film history, the films in which she appears go to great lengths to frame her violence within the very symbolic system that her violence threatens to undo. In this way, these films are an effort to ameliorate the social antagonism at the same time as they are explorations of it. Kupfer provides a similar sentiment. When women start taking charge in ways traditionally enjoyed by men, the meaning and norms associated with gender are bound to change. The problem here is that women who take up violence in a story are often given an arc which acts more as a cautionary tale against violence, which then doubles down on the way things are. Men are violent, women shouldn't be. Women characters must be role models. In action films, the man or masculine figure is the violent actor and protector. The woman or feminine figure is the innocent actor and must be protected. From a psychoanalytic point of view, this is a common film binary that has always existed. Violent women break that binary. From a Campbellian point of view, the presence of a binary at all provides the potential to transcend it entirely. Take, for example, The Matrix, in which the man and woman are both violent. Rather than having that be a barrier for romance, the surrealism of the setting allows for the two to transcend that expectation. However, the reduction of Trinity's role as a violent woman through the following films again illustrates that the writers have a hard time writing both individuals in a relationship as warriors or violent heroes, because violence is so often a part of that binary and it needs a complement. The complement most of the time being nurturing or peaceful. We get this sort of problem in the Bond films as well. A heroine or femme fatale who is obviously capable of violence and typically acts violently toward the hero often meets a tragic end rather than end up with the hero. Of course, the format of a Bond story is that it always involves a new love interest, so this is expected for many reasons, but generally all the women who are truly potential partners for Bond choose violence over love and are therefore punished for it, through death or exile. When a violent woman is not present, the male hero can have it all. The balance between violence and innocence, male and female, protector and protected are uninterrupted. The gender norms are not fought against. In these cases, the male hero gets his woman in the end because she's a complement to him. Theoretically, the presence of the violent woman actually promotes gender fluidity. It also may promote transcendence of the binary, where the hero, whether alone or with a partner, chooses to combine both violence and innocence within themselves, whether metaphorically or literally. And of course, the reaction or hostility or antagonism to these characters illustrates society's current status quo and the inability to change, to embrace the violent woman as a more complex, multi-layered character and not just a stereotype. So back to these images. The binary which was present in the prequel trilogy kept Anakin and Padme pretty equal. She is innocent, he is violent. She is a politician, he is a Jedi. Lucas armed Padme a few times to show her strength, but generally she was a complement. The peaceful and nurturing side of this binary. Her real death, presented as peaceful, went right alongside his symbolic death, presented as a nightmare. Anakin was punished for being violent, and Padme's death was not really a punishment, rather it was dictated by the story prior. But the binary that exists in the sequel trilogy is completely out of whack, and not in a good way. Rey is by definition a violent woman, a warrior, a Jedi. She and Ben were together violent actors. Neither Rey nor Ben represent innocence, nurture, or peace. Rather than leaning into that imbalance and promoting a fluidity of traits, the need to kill off one of them was too great. The aesthetic is that she ends up dead, gray in the face, lifeless, and limp. This is without romance or poetry or metaphor. It is wholly realistic, and it is frightening. On top of all this, the only way for her to be resurrected is by ending up alone. Ben's body, rather than being depicted in the same way Rey's was, gray, lifeless, and limp, disappears entirely. This imbalance is without explanation. Neither death is poetic, and neither is aesthetically meaningful. If the gender roles had been flipped, Ben might have been the hero that would have saved the female villain from her violence. But the heroine saving the male villain from his violence and maintaining her stance as a warrior and maintaining the romance between these two goes so against the norm. By the current status quo, you can't have two warriors fall in love and remain warriors. So Ben dies as if he were a woman in a Bond film. The same violence imbalance is struggled with in The 100, where Maddie is arguably Clark's complement, representing innocence. It's also seen in Maleficent, where Aurora is her innocent complement. Making women violent actors in the story decreases their chances to have romantic partners because writers struggle with making men weaker, and they struggle with finding complementing traits outside of this power imbalance. This is probably another reason the creators of Frozen find it difficult to give Elsa a romantic interest, regardless of her sexual preference. I think that even subconsciously, the writers know a powerful partner for Elsa would be preferable, but it's risky because it disrupts the balance that Anna and Elsa have already presented for the story. They are the binary. It's not impossible to overcome this, it's just that it drastically changes their product. Violence that is aesthetically meaningful and plays with the binary in creative ways absolutely does exist. However, as stated prior, it's often an isolated incident or in specific genres. While male-centric dramas, comedies, and dramedies are seemingly more violent in both structure and narrative, female-centric stories are becoming more careful with how they handle their feminine characters. But this is not exactly wanted or needed by the feminine audience. Violence towards women or violent women can be depicted if the writer provides meaningful layers to the aesthetic. Without those layers, and without that meaning, the violence packs an unpleasant punch to the female viewer. Though with it, there's the ability to transcend a duality and shake up gender norms without alienating the audience. You just gotta ask, why is it needed, and why is it being used in the way that it's being used? Thank you so much for watching. Please like, subscribe, and share this video if you want to see more content like this.